The coalition dome smelled like ozone, old coffee, and the combined anxiety of 37 sentient species, all of whom had signed a treaty agreeing not to vaporize each other in the building. Rian Hale adjusted the ill-fitting collar of his diplomatic tunic and tried not to trip on the hem. Earth's fashion designers still hadn't cracked galactic formal wear without making it look like either a magician's robe or a badly wrapped burrito. He looked like both. "Lieutenant Hale," a voice chimed in his ear, filtered through a translator chip. "Please refrain from smirking during the address. Violians consider that a predatory gesture." Rian forced his mouth into a neutral line and kept his eyes forward. The Violian delegation entered the chamber in synchronized formation, each one clad in obsidian armor with silver-threaded veils hiding their faces. At the center walked her, Queen Azel-Tor, 7 feet tall, bearing herself like she had gravitational authority over the room itself. He whispered to himself, "Do not make eye contact. Do not joke about the ears." Too late. Her head turned slightly. The ceremonial helm she wore was removed by one of her aides, revealing the elongated, pearl-sheen ears that swept upward like the fins of an exotic fish. They twitched once, only slightly, but enough that Rian could tell she'd heard him. Of course she had. Violians were partially telepathic. He mentally pictured a wall of bricks and labeled it "Nothing to see here." The ambassador from Glorvax 6 began droning about interstellar trade policy. Rian fought to stay awake. He scanned the crowd, looking for anything to latch onto. A four-eyed minister from Mardun was clearly napping behind his own tentacle. A delegation from Earth's moon was arguing over seat priority. A diplomatic lizard in robes had somehow fallen asleep standing up and was now slowly sliding down the wall like melting jello. Rian tuned back in just in time to hear the Glorvax ambassador say, "And in closing, we honor the Violian queen with the crystal emblem of stellar harmony." There was a pause as an awkwardly large gem on a hover platter floated toward Azel. She raised an elegant eyebrow, took the emblem between 2 clawed fingers, and held it aloft for a moment before placing it on the podium like a child being handed a participation trophy. Then she spoke, her voice melodic but commanding. "We accept this offering. Its composition is adequate." A flicker of amusement, or judgment, Rian couldn't tell. Violians were impossible to read, which was probably why they scared everyone. The moment passed, the formalities continued, and Rian eventually found himself near the buffet table, trying to decipher the contents of a steaming tray labeled ambiguous protein cubes, vegan. "I wouldn't recommend those," said a voice behind him. "They smell like friendship but taste like regret." He turned, a tall figure in a dark cloak. The queen, not in her armor, just walking around, casually, unattended. He nearly dropped his protein cube. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing, then half bowing, then giving up and settling on a kind of awkward crouch. "I grow weary of ceremonies," she said. "They are composed of excessive noise and insufficient meaning." He looked around. "Yeah, we specialize in that." Her eyes, silver with a faint glow, locked on his. "You made a sound earlier about ears." He felt the blood drain from his face. No, that was a diplomatic sneeze, very respectful where I come from." A pause, then she said, "You are odd. You should meet my uncle. He once tried to cook a steak using only a magnifying glass in spite." Another pause. Another twitch of her ear. Was she smiling? "I like your mind," she said. "That's not something I hear a lot," he replied. "Usually it's more like, are you sure you passed the psych eval? I reviewed your profile. You are underqualified, underranked, and underdressed, yet you remain." Rian sipped a drink that might have been fermented algae. "Earth budget diplomacy. We survive on charm and dumb luck." There was a long silence, not awkward, just silent. Then unexpectedly she removed the cloak. Underneath she wore a silken garment that shimmered like nebulae. Her armor was gone. Her long ears, now unobstructed, reflected the soft lighting of the chamber. Without her crown she looked startlingly alive. Still regal, still distant, but less of a myth, more of a person. Rian blinked, and said without thinking in a voice barely above a whisper, "You're so beautiful I can't even speak." The queen froze, not metaphorically, physically, completely, as if someone had paused her existence. Her cheeks, usually a subtle opalescent shade, shifted. Faint purple streaks bloomed along the edges of her face, the Virelian sign of embarrassment. A blush. She turned away quickly, then, clearly misjudging her escape route, walked directly into a decorative light pillar. It hummed loudly as it bent sideways and triggered a small holographic fireworks display, which exploded with a pop and the phrase, "Unity Forever," in 17 languages. Rian stood there, stunned, holding his ambiguous protein cube. The queen gathered herself, muttered something in a dialect his translator refused to process, and disappeared down a hallway lined with diplomatic flags and absolutely no signage. He stared after her, then looked at the protein cube, then at the pillar still blinking forever. "Great," he muttered. "I broke intergalactic royalty with a compliment. Earth is going to love that." Rian Hale had never been on a royal flagship before. Not unless you counted that time he accidentally boarded a wedding cruiser from the planet Wazul 9, mistaking it for a diplomatic shuttle. That had ended with him being declared honorary best man of the Eternal Lava Bond. Long story, lots of fire. This time, though, he was here by official request. The Queen's personal vessel, the Virelian Crown, was currently orbiting the third moon of Viria Prime, shimmering like a dagger dipped in dark water. And Rian was pretty sure he wasn't supposed to be here, except apparently he was. He asked 3 times. "Am I being arrested?" "No." "Am I being assigned?" "Not exactly." "Am I being adopted into the royal family?" The Virelian escort had stared at him blankly and then walked away. Now he stood in what he assumed was a waiting chamber. The walls pulsed gently, like the inside of a sleeping creature. Furniture molded itself to fit him when he sat, which he discovered by accident after leaning too hard against what he thought was a statue. It sighed contentedly and reshaped into a recliner. A voice echoed through the chamber. "Lieutenant Rian Hale, you are summoned." Summoned, that was never a great word. Too medieval, too dramatic, too likely to end with someone losing a head. He followed the corridor, guided by soft lights that responded to his footsteps. The ship was alive, at least partially. Bioengineered from something called Virelian root coral, which, according to his briefings, was capable of self-healing, energy regulation, and sulking if ignored too long. When he entered the Queen's chamber, he braced for another lecture, or worse, interstellar diplomacy. Instead, he found Queen Azel sitting barefoot on a hovering disk, legs crossed, long ears twitching minutely. Gone was the armor, the ceremonial garb. She wore a fluid garment that looked like it had been woven from space dust and soft threads. She did not look at him immediately. I reviewed the footage. He froze, the Unity fireworks. Yes. Look, in my defense, I didn't expect the pillar to be structurally unsound, or to shout in 17 languages. I was referring, she said, turning to face him, to what you said. Oh, that, he tugged at his collar, right. The compliment. Do you often tell political leaders that they are beautiful? Only the terrifying ones. Another twitch of her ear. Your words disrupted my neural balance. Is that dangerous? No, merely embarrassing. My people do not receive compliments, not in that way. Cultural thing. We view appearance as a function, not a virtue. Praise for form is considered intrusive. So I basically said the equivalent of nice spleen. Worse, you indicated admiration for a trait that implies vulnerability and intimacy. Well, great, Rian muttered. My mouth has finally achieved galactic incident status. There was a silence, then shockingly she laughed, or something close to it. A breathy, short exhale that sounded like a sigh of surrender. The first time he'd heard her do anything that wasn't either regal or terrifying. You fascinate me, she said. I hear that a lot, usually right before people walk away. I want to understand you. That's also something people say before walking away. She stood, come with me. Where are we going? To the gardens. You have gardens on a warship. Where do you think we keep the diplomatic plants? He followed her through a corridor lined with softly glowing flora. Some of the vines waved at him. One sneezed when he got too close. The garden chamber opened like a blossoming flower. Bioluminescent plants spiraled up the walls, and alien trees floated in slow, deliberate rotation above a pool of gravity-suspended water. It was like someone had genetically engineered peace and then made it float in a zero-G terrarium. Is this where you bring all your accidental flirts? He asked. She stopped. This is where I come to avoid everyone else. Well, honored to be the exception. She gestured to a floating bench. It obeyed, they sat. I studied human humor, she said after a pause. Oh boy. It is peculiar. Much of it involves pain, failure, or exaggeration. Yep, that's us, laughing our way through existential dread. She tilted her head. You make jokes when you are afraid. All the time. And when you are sad. Especially then. And when you are lonely. He looked at her. Is this an interrogation disguised as a bonding exercise? Yes. Well then, full honesty. She nodded. I've never been on a ship this beautiful. I've never met a monarch who nearly dislocated her dignity on a light fixture. And I've definitely never been summoned by anyone who blushed. Her ears twitched again. She glanced away. I am unaccustomed to transparency, she said. My world values reserve, detachment. To lead is to remain distant. And yet here you are, sharing your glow-in-the-dark secret garden with a human disaster in borrowed clothes. You are not a disaster. I once mistook an airlock for a bathroom. You are a unique strategic asset. Now that's a compliment. Can I put it on my tombstone? They sat in companionable silence, watching a tree slowly release glittering spores that floated upward, turning into tiny light motes. She finally said, Would you like to remain here as my advisor? He blinked. Wait, are you offering me a job? Yes. Do I get dental? We regenerate teeth. Oh, nice. I ask this not out of need, but curiosity. You are unlike the others, unpredictable, sincere, and annoying. Frequently. He leaned back, watching the lights drift. Well, he said, if this is how you do job interviews, I'm in. She stood, then prepare yourself. We leave for Viria Prime tomorrow. Right, nothing stressful about visiting your home planet after causing a minor royal scandal. She paused at the chamber door. Rian Hale. Yes, thank you for speaking. He grinned. Happy to do it again. Just maybe not near structural columns this time. The shuttle descending toward Viria Prime made the sound of an asthmatic whale gargling bolts. Rian gripped the edge of his seat as gravity caught the vessel in its steely embrace and reminded everyone on board that physics had no sense of humor. You okay? He asked the Virelian guard beside him, whose expression remained unchanged despite the turbulence that had just upended Rian's stomach and most of his dignity. We are descending at optimal velocity. I think my internal organs disagree. The guard blinked once, then returned to studying something on a tablet that looked suspiciously like a list titled Human Behaviors and Their Possible Meanings. Rian didn't dare peek further. Across the aisle, Queen Azelle sat in perfect calm, her long ears unmoving even as the shuttle lurched sideways. Rian wasn't sure if it was supreme discipline, superior anatomy, or just that she had better anti-nausea nanobots than he did. When the shuttle finally docked, it did so with a hiss of pride and a metallic thunk that suggested it had survived despite its passengers. The door peeled open, revealing a port station carved directly into the mountain spine of Viria's equatorial range. Everything was clean lines, glowing latticework and faint echoes of alien choral music that played automatically every time someone of noble blood walked through the terminal. Is this singing for you? Rian whispered as he followed the queen down the ramp. Yes, she replied. It is encoded into the stone. That's subtle. Humility, is not among our primary virtues. Good to know. I'll adjust my expectations accordingly. As they moved through the port, various figures bowed in silence. Rian tried to bow back, tripped slightly, then covered it by pretending to stretch his calves. The queen didn't look back, but he was pretty sure one of her ears twitched. They were escorted to the palace, a sprawling structure built into the cliffside, part organic growth, part architectural marvel, and entirely confusing. Rian couldn't tell where the walls ended and the ceiling began. Everything moved slightly, as if breathing. Their arrival triggered an immediate swarm of officials, all with elongated ears and elegant disdain etched into their expressions. Rian was introduced as the human. No title, no rank. Just the species. Well, he muttered, at least I've finally made a name for myself. The next few hours were a whirlwind of diplomatic formalities. Rian wasn't involved in any of them. He was offered a room and politely told to remain within his designated Serenity quadrant. The room, to its credit, was spacious, quiet, and filled with floating objects that changed color depending on his mood. After accidentally triggering a piece of furniture to recite epic poetry at him for 20 minutes, he decided to wander, within the quadrant, of course. That was where he encountered KRRT, the Queen's personal AI, who had taken the form of a floating silver orb with 2 sarcastic eyelights. "You are not authorized to be here," KRRT said flatly as Rian approached the Royal Observatory deck. "I'm not authorized to be in most places. It's sort of my brand. You were instructed to rest. I'm a restless sleeper." "You're awake." "Exactly." KRRT hovered in place, processing this with the audible hum of condescension. Eventually it said, "The Queen is occupied. Do not disturb her unless you are on fire." "Noted. Although, in fairness, I've almost been on fire before, so." "I know. I have reviewed your personnel file." Rian leaned on the railing and looked out over the glowing horizon. Twin moons shimmered in the upper sky, casting Viria Prime in hues of silver and cyan. "Do you know why she asked me to come here?" he asked. "Yes." "Are you going to tell me?" "No." "Is it because you're incapable of experiencing humor? I am fluent in over 4 million forms of sarcasm." "Impressive. I only speak 2, bad timing and inappropriate laughter." There was a pause, then KRRT floated closer. "She finds you perplexing. Virilians do not entertain ambiguity. You embody it. That's the nicest backhanded compliment I've ever received from a floating appliance." That night Rian was summoned again, this time by Azel herself. The chamber she received him in was filled with swirling light patterns projected across the walls, slowly shifting with her thoughts. "I'm starting to think you guys don't do normal rooms," he said as he entered. "Why build static walls when we possess minds that move?" She replied. "I mean, sometimes it's just nice to hang a towel." She gestured for him to sit. "I need your insight," she said. "I'll try to be insightful. But full disclosure, I once spent an hour arguing with a vending machine. Our intelligence divisions intercepted a message. Someone within the High Conclave is plotting to destabilize our diplomatic standing with Earth." "Why Earth? We barely got invited to the party." "Because of me," she said quietly. "Because of you." He blinked. "You think this is about us?" "The perception of vulnerability, the potential of affection. In our culture, those are threats." Rian leaned back. "You're saying someone might start a war because you blushed." "No, I'm saying someone might prevent peace because I allowed myself to." He let out a long breath. "Galactic politics are exhausting." She stood pacing. "I have spent cycles building control, presence, and then one stray sentence from a human with no diplomatic credentials. And the Queen walks into a wall," he finished. "Yeah, that part's gonna be hard to live down." She turned sharply, but "We need to be seen together," she said, "publicly, to control the narrative. As allies. As something less defined." Rian hesitated. "Are you proposing a diplomatic situationship?" "I do not know what that means." "Good. Neither do most humans." There was another pause. Then she said, Will you accompany me to the Conclave Summit tomorrow? Do I get to wear another uncomfortable robe? Yes. Do I get to make uncomfortable jokes? Please do not. Then I'm in. As he stood to leave, she added, Rian Hale. Yeah. Thank you for speaking, even when you shouldn't. He grinned, it's my specialty. The Conclave Summit began with a choir of living crystals, singing in 11 dimensions. Rian couldn't hear most of it, but it made his teeth itch and gave him temporary memories of a childhood he never had on a planet that didn't exist. He nodded politely anyway. You'll want to stop blinking like that, Queen Azel murmured beside him as they ascended the grand dais. It reads as anxiety, or dishonesty, or constipation depending on the species. Great, Rian muttered. I'm accidentally broadcasting emotional indigestion to an entire galactic assembly. He adjusted his ceremonial robe, which had once belonged to a revered Virelian scholar and smelled faintly of fermented logic. The garment didn't fit so much as hover near fitting, like it was still evaluating whether he deserved to wear it. They stepped into the primary hall, a dome of refracted starlight and suspended orbs containing the seated representatives of 73 civilizations. The orbs rotated slowly, aligning every few seconds to re-establish symmetrical fairness, which Rian found both beautiful and extremely disorienting. He leaned toward Azel. Are you absolutely sure this isn't an elaborate opera I've been accidentally cast in? If it were, she replied, you'd be dead in the first act. Charming. The summit began with the reading of the stellar accords, a process involving 3 hours of historical quotes, 7 traditional dances, and a sudden intermission when a delegate from the aquatic moon of Lurg declared himself emotionally overwhelmed and required misting. Rian used the break to wander the side hall. He wasn't technically allowed to, but he discovered that walking purposefully with a clipboard, even one borrowed from a janitorial bot, generally gave the impression of authority. He was mid-stroll when he overheard a voice behind a privacy shimmer field. The Queen has become distracted. The human is a weakness. We proceed tonight. He froze, took one cautious step closer. Phase 1 has already begun. The mimic unit is in position. Another voice. Does it look like her? Perfectly. The switch will occur during the unity rite. Rian blinked. Mimic unit. He backed away slowly, only to bump into something very solid and unexpectedly covered in feathers. He turned. A creature roughly the shape of a vending machine with wings and a monocle blinked down at him. Lost, mammalian. No, just admiring your shine. The creature made a noise like a disapproving tuba and waddled past. Rian sprinted back to the Queen's private suite, only to be intercepted by KRRT halfway. You are pale, more than usual. This indicates alarm. You think, Rian gasped. KRRT, someone's planning to replace the Queen with a mimic during the ceremony. KRRT paused. That is statistically alarming. We need to warn her, now. She is currently engaged in a mental duel with the High Arbiter of Qatar. Can she pause that? No, his mind would explode. Well, Rian said, we wouldn't want any exploding minds today, would we? KRRT floated ahead. Follow me, we will locate the mimic. They made their way to the ceremonial preparation wing, where aides were bustling about with ritual instruments, glowing banners, and what looked suspiciously like a helmet-sized fruit basket. Rian stopped cold. There, standing at the mirror dressed identically to Queen Azel, was Queen Azel. Both of them turned when he entered. He blinked. Okay, I've seen a lot of weird things. I once attended a wedding where the groom was 3 raccoons in a trench coat. But this takes the cake. The cake, the candles, and the whole bakery. KRRT hovered closer. One of these is not the Queen. Brilliant deduction, Watson. Any clue which one? Both Azels stared at him. One folded her arms, the other said, Rian, you're late. He hesitated. Okay, one of you knows me, that's a start. The first Azel said, I asked you to wait in the observatory after the summit. You didn't. The second Azel said, I told you not to wear that robe because it would make your hips look undiplomatic. He blinked again. Okay. Both of those sound like things she'd say. KRRT word. We could initiate a molecular scan. The second Azel raised a hand. Wait, that's unnecessary. She stepped forward. You want to know which one of us is real? Yes, Rian said. Preferably before one of you shanks the other with a ceremonial dagger. She looked at him. You once said I was beautiful. The first Azel flinched. The second Azel continued. And I walked into a wall. Then you told me I made you nervous. And I said your fear was poorly concealed under layers of sarcasm and snack-based humor. The first Azel snarled. Literally, KRRT beeped. That is a mimic. Virelian mimics cannot tolerate emotional intimacy. The fake Azel dissolved in a hiss of static and slime, leaving behind what looked like a deflated parachute made of anxiety. Gross, Rian muttered. Do we recycle that or? Guards stormed in moments later. The real queen remained perfectly composed. Arrest any other imposters. Rian with me. They fled down a side corridor as alarms began to pulse through the walls. She looked at him as they ran. You found it before the switch. I have excellent eavesdropping instincts. And poor timing. It's my signature trait. They stopped inside a reinforced safe room. She turned to him. This changes everything. Because I saved you. Because you believed me capable of being human. He smiled, breathless. You are human on the inside, just with better posture. For the first time she smiled openly. Then the safe room lights dimmed. A second alarm sounded. KRRT's voice came over the comm. Correction, there were 2 mimics. Rian Hale always suspected he'd die in a confusing situation, possibly involving lasers, probably wearing the wrong outfit. But as the lights dimmed in the safe room and the voice of a smug floating orb announced the existence of 2 shape-shifting assassins, he briefly hoped he'd at least be wearing pants when it happened. Queen Azel raised her hand. Remain calm. I am calm, Rian said. This is my calm face. You should see my screaming internally face. It looks remarkably similar. A metallic scraping echoed outside the chamber, then another. Then the unmistakable slurp of something gelatinous dragging itself across polished crystal floors. I think it found us, Rian whispered. No, KRRT said over comms. They found you. Great, Rian muttered, plural. That's always encouraging. Backup is en route, KRRT continued. However, your odds of surviving the next 6 minutes are mathematically unpleasant. How unpleasant? Would you like the number or just a comforting lie? Surprise me. The walls pulsed as the chamber's inner security lattice activated. Azel moved with practiced grace to the control panel and whispered a Virelian phrase that sounded like a lullaby and a nuclear launch code. I need to access the neural interface, she said. Right, Rian replied. I'll just distract the murder blobs until then. They are engineered to mimic any biological form, except under emotional duress. I excel at emotional duress, Rian said. It's practically a lifestyle. The first mimic slid under the door in a puddle of shimmering goo, coalescing into an imperfect replica of Rian himself. Oh, that's rude, he said. You didn't even try to match my hair. It lunged. Rian ducked. You know, he muttered while scrambling behind a console, I always thought if I had to fight myself, I'd at least have the decency to lose with dignity. The second mimic followed, this one morphing into Azel but with dead eyes and twitching ears that didn't sync correctly. Rian pointed. Okay, that's offensive. Her ears are way more elegant. The real queen activated the interface, her mind linking to the ship's bioarchitecture. The room responded instantly, sealing off escape paths and emitting a harmonic pulse designed to destabilize false nerve clusters. The Mimicryon staggered. Ha, Rian said, throwing a small fruit at its head. Organic counterattack. The Mimicazel retaliated by hurling a chair made of anti-gravity foam. It missed. Mostly because Rian tripped over his own foot and fell out of the way entirely by accident. The queen raised both arms, targeting emotional frequencies. Your Majesty, Rian asked, do I want to know what that means? I need you to be honest, completely. This feels like a dangerous time to start therapy. Tell me what you feel. I feel like I'm in mortal danger. Beneath that, I feel like this isn't how diplomatic missions are supposed to go. Beneath that, I feel like I've been terrified since I met you, but also like I've never felt more alive. And maybe that's not normal, but I don't care. And if I die here, at least I got to see you blush, which, by the way, was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And yes, I meant it. The room pulsed, both mimics convulsed, then disintegrated in a whimpering fizz of failed chemistry and rejected emotional data. Silence. KRRT's voice returned. Mimics neutralized, backup arriving now. Rian sat down on the floor. Well, that was emotionally violent. The queen stepped toward him. You created a destabilizing feedback loop by confessing truth. Yeah, he said, that's a side effect of honesty. Can cause spontaneous sincerity and minor explosions. She knelt beside him. We are safe now. That's good, he breathed, because I'm not emotionally equipped to fight a third me. They returned to the summit an hour later, slightly disheveled but notably alive. KRRT leaked the mimic attack details to the Conclave media network using a convenient security breach excuse. Sympathy swelled. Unity surged. And Azel, ever the tactician, rode the narrative like a comet. A week later, in a gathering held under the twin moons, Queen Azel performed the unity rite. Instead of a traditional political partner, she called forth Rian Hale. The crowd gasped. A few cameras short-circuited from sheer confusion. Azel held out her hand. Earth's representative has shown loyalty beyond protocol, emotion beyond calculation, and bravery beyond logic. I choose to bind our futures, not through strategy, but through choice. Rian stepped forward. I just thought we were doing a press event. She didn't laugh, not out loud, but her ears twitched twice. The rite completed. The alliance cemented. The mimic conspiracy dismantled. Viria elevated Earth to full Union membership. Several old galactic powers groaned audibly. Later, as the stars glittered above the palace garden, Rian stood beside her. So what now? He asked.